Hello there, and welcome to The Sleepy Historian, a quiet corner where the past drifts in softly and forgotten worlds return as gentle stories for the night. Tonight, we'll be wandering into ancient Rome's invisible rules, the small habits, silent rituals, and strange expectations that still shape everyday life around you, even now letting old times unfold at a pace meant for rest. Now, dim the lights. Maybe let a fan hum in the background, and let's slowly step into the past, softly, gently, together. You are already standing in line. At first, it does not feel like a decision. It feels like something your body understands before your thoughts catch up. Someone stands ahead of you, someone stands behind you, and so you remain where you are, patient, quiet, facing forward. No one explains the rule. No one needs to. The line exists, and so you belong inside it. Now the stone beneath your sandals is warm from the morning sun. Dust floats lightly in the air. Somewhere ahead, voices rise and fall in slow conversation, the gentle sound of people waiting together for something they cannot hurry. This is not a train station, not an airport, not a government office. You are standing in the Roman Forum, waiting for grain. Around you stretch long rows of citizens, some older, some younger, some leaning on walking sticks polished smooth by years of use. No one pushes, no one argues loudly. The line moves slowly, but it moves. That is enough. Rome understood something simple and powerful. If people wait in an orderly line, they feel calmer than if they rush in a crowd, even when the waiting is long, even when the result is uncertain. When order feels like fairness, even when it is not. Lucius stands a few steps ahead of you. He arrived early this morning, before the sun had cleared the rooftops, hoping to secure a place near the front. His sandals still carry the pale dust of the road outside the city gate. He shifts his weight from one foot to the other, not impatiently but carefully, conserving energy for the hours ahead. He does not ask how long the line will take. He does not expect an answer. In Rome, the line itself is already the answer. The grain distribution is not simply a delivery of food, it is a performance of stability. Thousands of citizens gather, they wait, they receive, they return home. The city breathes in and out through this quiet ritual of standing together. If you arrive early, you eat. If you arrive late, you learn something about timing and responsibility. The line does not bend for excuses, it does not hurry for complaints. It does not notice broken sandals or tired children, and somehow this makes it feel fair. Roman officials understood that people tolerate hardship more easily when everyone appears to share it. Waiting alone feels like punishment, waiting together feels like order. So the line becomes more than a line. It becomes a promise that the system is working, even when it moves slowly enough to test your patience. You notice how naturally everyone follows the shape of it. No ropes guide you, no painted marks divide the ground, no guards repeat instructions. The citizens themselves maintain the line. Someone steps too far forward and receives a quiet glance. Someone hesitates and another gestures gently where to stand. No one announces the rule, but everyone protects it. This is how Rome kept crowds calm in markets, in temples, in bathhouses, and even in courtrooms. People stood in line to receive military pay. They stood in line to submit petitions. They stood in line to watch trials unfold beneath open sky. Sometimes they even stood in line before executions. You might imagine such a moment filled with noise or protest, but Roman crowds were often patient even then. Officials adjusted their robes, clerks checked tablets, witnesses confirmed names. The line waited. It seemed strange at first, this willingness to stand quietly while something serious approaches. Yet the line itself created a feeling that events were unfolding properly. The order of bodies suggested the order of the world. Chaos causes fear. Lines create calm. Lucius reaches the shaded edge of a column now. He lifts one hand to brush dust from his sleeve. Someone behind him coughs softly. Somewhere farther ahead, a sack of grain shifts with a dull rustling sound, and the line moves forward again by a single careful step. No one cheers. No one complains. Movement is enough. You begin to notice something else as you stand there. The line does not only distribute grain, It distributes patience. It teaches waiting as a habit. It teaches trust in sequence. It teaches the comfort of knowing that your turn exists somewhere ahead, even if you cannot see it yet. Rome relied on this feeling everywhere. Citizens queued outside offices to submit requests written on wax tablets. They queued beside fountains to collect water. They queued in narrow streets outside the homes of powerful patrons before sunrise, hoping for a brief greeting that confirmed loyalty and protection. Each line repeated the same quiet lesson. Stand here. Wait calmly. The system will reach you when it is ready. Over time, people stopped asking whether the waiting was necessary. The waiting became normal. The shape of the line began to feel like the shape of fairness itself. Even now, many centuries later, something inside you still responds to this ancient geometry. When someone cuts ahead in a queue, the reaction is immediate and surprisingly strong, not because the delay is serious, but because the order has been disturbed. The line was speaking, and someone interrupted it. Lucius finally reaches the wooden table where sacks are measured and recorded. A clerk presses a stylus gently into a wax tablet, was marking his name with careful strokes that will fade by evening but still matter today. Grain is lifted, weighed, and handed forward. He nods once, quietly, as if acknowledging not the clerk but the line itself. And as you step forward to take his place, you begin to sense something even more lasting than bread or patience. Rome did not only teach people how to wait for food, it taught them how to wait for permission. And somewhere nearby, another Roman habit is already waiting for you. A habit made not of lines, but of ink and wax and signatures pressed carefully into soft surfaces. You are holding a small wooden tablet in your hands. It is smooth from use, slightly warm from the room, and covered with a thin layer of dark wax pressed carefully into its shallow frame. A stylus rests nearby, its pointed tip ready to carve quiet lines into the surface. The marks you are about to make are not large. They will not travel far. They will not last forever. And yet, they will matter more than memory. In Rome, people trusted what was written down. They trusted it more than promises spoken across a doorway, more than friendships formed over shared meals, sometimes even more than family loyalty itself. If something important happened, it needed to exist in ink, in wax, or beneath the witness of a recorded agreement. Otherwise, it might as well never have happened at all. This did not mean Romans were suspicious people in the way we might imagine. It meant they lived inside a system that believed writing made reality steadier. A spoken promise could drift away like breath on a cold morning. A written agreement remained. You are standing now inside a quiet household room where light from a small oil lamp moves slowly across the table surface. Marcia sits opposite you. She is not a magistrate, not a senator, not a professional scribe. She manages a household, watches over supplies, arranges purchases, and keeps track of obligations that stretch across weeks and months. Today, she is confirming a rental agreement for a storage space near the market street. It would be possible to settle this arrangement with a handshake. Many people might do exactly that in a smaller village. But here, inside a Roman city, something feels unfinished until it is written. Marcia presses her seal ring gently into the wax. The wax gives way with a soft resistance, then holds the impression of her family mark. It is a small sign, but it transforms the agreement. What was once a conversation is now something heavier, something steadier, something that belongs to the system itself. Nearby, a witness leans forward and nods once. Witnesses matter in Rome. They do not only observe, they anchor the moment in public memory. Their presence turns a private agreement into something shared and recognized. Even if no dispute ever appears, their quiet attention strengthens the document's weight. You begin to notice how often writing surrounds daily life here. Marriage agreements are written, loans are written, property transfers are written, employment arrangements are written. Even the freeing of a slave, one of the most emotional moments a household might experience, is confirmed through careful documentation. Paperwork in Rome is not decoration, it is protection. A written agreement creates a boundary around expectation. It tells everyone involved where responsibility begins and where it ends. It allows disputes to settle without shouting. It allows strangers to cooperate without needing to become friends first. And slowly, without anyone announcing it, writing begins to replace trust as the foundation of certainty. Marcia folds the tablet closed now. The wax inside remains hidden but secure. The agreement exists whether anyone remembers the conversation tomorrow or not. This is the quiet power of Roman documentation. It does not depend on memory. It does not depend on mood. It does not depend on whether two people continue to like each other next month. It depends only on whether the mark was made. Across the city, thousands of similar moments unfold each day. A merchant records the arrival of goods from a distant harbor. A father confirms the transfer of property to his daughter. A freedman carries proof of his new legal status, folded carefully inside a cloth pouch. Each document adds another thread to the web that holds the city together. You begin to sense how comforting this must have felt. In a world where roads stretched across mountains and seas, where messages traveled slowly, and where officials changed from year to year, writing created something stable. A document could travel farther than a voice. It could survive longer than a conversation. It could speak even when the original speakers were gone. This is why Roman agreements were rarely short. They repeated phrases carefully. They described conditions in several slightly different ways. They listed witnesses even when everyone already knew who was present. At first, this repetition seems unnecessary, but it served a purpose. Complexity created confidence. If a document felt heavy and detailed, it felt reliable. If it required effort to read, it felt important. If it included witnesses, seals, and signatures, it felt permanent. Over time, people stopped asking whether they fully understood what they signed. Understanding became less important than participation. The act of agreeing mattered more than the clarity of the agreement itself. You can almost see this habit forming as Marcia places the tablet beside the lamp and smooths the edge of her sleeve. She does not reread every line. She does not need to. The seal is already enough. Somewhere nearby, another agreement is being written between two neighbors about the temporary use of a ladder. Somewhere else, a young clerk copies a contract describing the sale of a small vineyard beyond the city walls. Somewhere farther still, a magistrate confirms a citizenship record that will determine a family's legal standing for generations. Writing moves quietly through the city like a slow, steady rain. It touches everything, and after a while, people begin to feel safer standing beneath it. Even now, many centuries later, something inside you still recognizes this comfort. When you sign a document, click a confirmation box, or accept written terms you only partly understand, you're repeating a gesture that once unfolded beside oil lamps and wax tablets like this one. The document exists, and because it exists, the agreement feels real. But as you sit in this lamplit room and watch the wax cool beneath Marcia's seal, another realization begins to form quietly beside it. These documents were not only preserving memory, they were beginning to shape authority itself. You are no longer holding the tablet. Now you are reading it. Or at least, you are trying to. The marks pressed into the wax seem clear enough at first. Names appear where you expect them. Locations follow. Dates are carefully recorded. Witnesses stand in orderly rows of letters, each one confirming what has already been confirmed once before. Everything feels precise, and yet, as your eyes move further down the lines, something changes. The sentences grow longer. The phrases begin repeating themselves, almost but not quite the same each time. One clause explains another clause that refers back to the first. Conditions appear inside conditions, like small rooms built inside larger rooms. Nothing contradicts anything else, but nothing feels simple anymore either. This is not an accident. In Rome, legal writing was not designed to be easy. It was designed to be strong. Strength came from repetition. Strength came from detail. Strength came from saying the same thing several times in slightly different ways, so that no one could later claim the agreement had been misunderstood. Clarity mattered less than durability. Across the table from you sits Publius, a young scribe whose fingers carry faint lines of dark wax beneath the nails. He has spent most of the afternoon copying a property contract from one tablet to another. The original belongs to a merchant. The copy will travel to a magistrate's office. Another version will be stored in a household chest. 3 copies for one agreement, 3 versions for one memory. Publius reads each sentence carefully as he writes, not because he expects to challenge it, but because he must reproduce it exactly. The order of the words matters, the spacing matters, even the repeated phrases matter. He does not fully understand every clause he copies. That is normal. Roman contracts were not written for everyone to understand. They were written so that no one could easily challenge them. If the language feels heavy, the agreement feels serious. If the sentences feel difficult, the document feels important. If the structure feels complex, the system feels reliable. Complexity creates distance, and distance creates authority. You begin to notice how carefully the contract avoids simple language. Instead of saying that a field changes ownership, it describes the transfer through witnesses, conditions, boundaries, seasons, and obligations attached to the soil itself. Instead of saying that payment will be made, it describes how payment will be recognized, recorded, confirmed, and remembered. Nothing is left standing alone. Every idea is tied to another idea. This careful weaving makes the document feel less like a conversation and more like a structure. Not a sentence spoken between two people, but a framework built to outlast them both. Publius pauses briefly to warm the stylus between his fingers. The wax has cooled slightly, and the surface has become resistant again. He leans closer to the tablet and continues copying the next line without comment. He does not need to approve the agreement, he only needs to preserve it. This is how written authority grows quietly stronger than spoken understanding. Over time, people stop expecting documents to feel clear. Instead, they expect them to feel official. The weight of the language becomes part of the agreement's power. If something sounds complicated, it must be correct. If something requires effort to read, it must be important. If something cannot be easily questioned, it must be secure. And slowly, almost without noticing, participation replaces comprehension. You see this change in small gestures. A merchant nods before finishing a clause. A neighbor presses a seal into wax without asking for explanation. A witness confirms a signature without rereading the agreement. The act of agreeing becomes enough. The document exists. That is what matters. Across the city, contracts describe rooms, vineyards, workshops, ships, tools, dowries, apprenticeships, and debts. Some are copied once, some are copied many times, some are stored in household chests, others are carried carefully along roads that stretch beyond the city gates. Each document repeats the same quiet message. Reality is safer when it is written. You begin to understand why Roman agreements often sounded repetitive. A single promise might appear in 3 slightly different forms inside the same contract, not because the writers were uncertain, but because repetition created protection. If one phrase failed, another remained. The agreement became harder to weaken. Like a basket woven from several overlapping strands, each sentence supported the next. Remove one strand, and the structure still held its shape. This careful craft did something else as well. It taught people to trust documents even when they did not fully understand them. Publius finishes copying the final clause now. He lifts the stylus and gently smooths the edge of the wax with the side of his hand. The tablet is complete. It looks almost identical to the original beside it, though neither version feels entirely transparent to him. That does not trouble him. Understanding is not required. Accuracy is. And once accuracy becomes more important than understanding, something subtle changes inside a society. People begin to accept decisions because they are written. They begin to trust outcomes because they are recorded. They begin to follow agreements because they exist in official form. The document speaks, and even when no one explains what it says. Many centuries later, the same quiet habit still moves through everyday life. Long agreements appear before new homes, new jobs, new services, and new responsibilities. Their sentences stretch across pages. Their meanings sometimes feel distant. Still, people continue to sign them, not because they understand every word, but because the presence of the document itself creates reassurance. The agreement exists, and so it must be correct. Yet, as Publius sets the finished tablet beside the others and watches the lamplight settle across their surfaces, another realization begins to take shape just beyond the edge of the writing. Documents alone could not control a city as large as Rome, Something slower was needed, something quieter, something that made people wait. By now, you have learned how to stand in line. You have learned how to sign a document. You have learned how to trust a seal pressed into warm wax. And so, when you arrive at the administrative courtyard, nothing feels unusual at first. The building is larger than the surrounding houses, though not decorated in a way that invites admiration. Its walls are plain. Its entrance is shaded. Inside, voices move slowly through the corridors like distant footsteps, echoing in a stable where many animals are resting, but none are moving quickly. You step forward anyway. There's a table near the doorway. A clerk sits behind it with a stylus balanced between his fingers. He does not look hurried. He does not look impatient. He looks as though he has been sitting there for a very long time and expects to remain there much longer still. You explain your request. He nods once, then he gestures toward another doorway. This is how administration begins in Rome, not with refusal, not with agreement, but with direction. You cross the courtyard and enter the second room. Another clerk listens carefully, then tilts his head slightly and suggests that your petition must first be recorded elsewhere. He speaks politely. He does not dismiss you. He simply moves your request one step farther along its path. This also feels normal. Nearby, a farmer waits beneath the edge of a column where the afternoon shade is deepest. His cloak carries the faint smell of dry grass and road dust. He arrived earlier than you did. He will leave later than you do. He is not upset. He is waiting. His petition concerns a boundary dispute between two neighboring fields outside the city. The matter is small compared with military campaigns or tax assessments, yet it still travels through the same careful sequence of rooms, desks, and tablets. First, the petition must be written, then it must be recorded, then it must be reviewed, then the review must be confirmed, then the confirmation must be sealed. Only after this quiet procession of steps can anything change. Rome understood something important about time. Power is not only the ability to decide. Power is the ability to delay. A decision that arrives immediately invites argument. A decision that arrives slowly feels heavier, more settled, more official. By the time the answer appears, the person who asked the question has already adjusted to waiting for it. Waiting softens resistance. You begin to notice how carefully each office preserves this distance. No one refuses your request. No one accepts it either. Instead, the request moves from one place to another, like a patient animal walking along a familiar path it has followed many times before. It does not hurry. It does not stop. It simply continues forward at its own steady pace. The farmer shifts his weight again and watches a clerk carry 3 tablets across the courtyard toward another doorway. He has already visited 2 rooms this morning. He will likely visit 2 more before sunset. Each visit brings him closer to resolution, though never quickly enough to measure. Still, he remains calm. This calmness is not accidental. Rome designed its administration so that responsibility never rested in one place for very long. Each official completed one small part of the process and then passed the request forward. If something went wrong, why, it was rarely clear where the mistake had begun. Responsibility moved upward, action moved slowly, and frustration had nowhere to settle. You walk past a shelf where tablets lie stacked in careful rows. Some contain tax records, others hold military reports, others still preserve citizenship requests written months earlier by people who may already be back in their villages waiting for answers that have not yet arrived. The system does not forget them, but it does not hurry toward them either. This distance between request and response changed how citizens behaved. Instead of expecting quick solutions, they expected procedures. Instead of arguing for immediate results, they prepared themselves for repetition. If a document required correction, they corrected it. If a seal was missing, they returned for another. Persistence was allowed, but resistance was not. The farmer finally steps forward again. A clerk calls his name softly and gestures toward the doorway where the next tablet must be confirmed. He nods once and gathers his cloak more tightly around his shoulders before crossing the courtyard. He does not ask why the process takes so long. He already understands. The process is the point. Rome did not need every request to succeed. It needed every request to travel through the system. Movement through offices created the feeling that the city was working even when outcomes remained uncertain. Waiting became part of citizenship itself. Over time, this waiting changed expectations. People stopped measuring success by speed. They measured it by completion. If a request reached its final seal, it had succeeded, even if the journey required weeks of visits and careful patience. You begin to recognize this rhythm as familiar. Many centuries later, the same quiet pattern appears in offices filled with forms instead of tablets, in corridors lined with chairs instead of columns, in conversations that end with instructions to return tomorrow rather than answers given today. The system still moves at its own pace. People still adjust themselves to match it. And as you leave the courtyard and step back into the brightness of the street, you begin to sense something else waiting quietly beside these procedures. The system did not only teach people how to wait, it taught them how to look correct while waiting. By the time you step back into the street, something has already changed. You are still the same person who stood in line for grain, the same person who watched wax seals pressed into tablets, the same person who crossed a courtyard from one office doorway to another. And yet now, as you walk toward the open space of the forum again, you become aware of something else moving quietly around you. Clothing. Not the comfort of it, not the warmth of it, but the meaning of it. Ahead of you, a young man pauses at the edge of the square. He lifts one arm carefully and adjusts the fold of his toga across his shoulder. The cloth is heavier than it looks, layered in a way that requires practice to arrange correctly. He smooths it once, then again, making sure the front edge falls neatly along his chest. Only then does he continue forward. This small movement is not vanity. It is preparation. In Rome, clothing does not simply cover the body. It announces the body's place in the world. Before anyone speaks, before any name is exchanged, the fabric itself has already begun the conversation. You begin to notice how different garments move through the crowd around you. A senator's toga carries a broad stripe that signals rank from a distance. A magistrate's clothing includes subtle variations that trained eyes recognize immediately. Laborers wear simpler tunics that allow movement rather than display. Foreign visitors often stand out without meaning to, their clothing marking them as guests before they say a single word. No sign is required. The cloth speaks clearly enough. The toga itself is one of Rome's most powerful symbols. It's not easy to wear, it is not easy to fold, it's not easy to walk in for long distances. And yet that difficulty is part of its meaning. Only Roman male citizens are permitted to wear it. Not visitors, not slaves, not travelers passing through the city for trade. The toga is not designed for comfort, it is designed for recognition. It tells everyone who sees it that the person inside the cloth belongs to the political life of the city. The young citizen ahead of you pauses again near the steps of the forum. He adjusts the edge of his garment once more, then straightens his shoulders slightly before continuing upward. He is not entering a private house. He is entering a public space where appearance matters. Here, clothing becomes a language, and like all languages, it can be learned. It can also be misunderstood. If someone appears in the wrong garment at the wrong place, attention follows quickly. Not loud attention, not dramatic attention. Just quiet glances from nearby faces, small pauses in conversation, a subtle shift in how people stand. In Rome, belonging is visible. This visibility creates order long before any official speaks. People recognize who may enter certain spaces and who should remain outside them. They recognize who may address the crowd and who should listen instead. They recognize who carries authority and who does not. Clothing teaches these lessons silently. You notice how even colors carry meaning. Pale fabric signals citizenship. Darker working garments suggest labor rather than debate. Decorative borders hint at office, responsibility, or recognition granted by the state. None of this requires explanation. Everyone already knows. The young citizen reaches the top of the steps now and disappears into the shifting movement of the forum crowd. His toga settles naturally across his shoulder as he walks. He no longer adjusts it. He no longer checks its position. The garment has become part of him again, as familiar as his own voice. Around you, Dozens of similar signals move quietly through the air. A merchant steps aside to allow a magistrate to pass. A group of clients gather near the entrance of a public building, their simpler tunics marking their role before they speak to anyone inside. A visitor pauses at the edge of the square, uncertain whether his clothing permits him to move farther forward. The rules are not written on the walls, they are written in fabric. Over time, people begin to follow these expectations without thinking about them. They choose garments carefully before leaving their homes. They adjust folds before entering public buildings. They notice mistakes in appearance quickly, even when no one explains what the mistake is. This quiet enforcement requires no guards, no announcements, no punishments spoken aloud. It works because everyone participates. You begin to recognize something familiar in this pattern. Many centuries later, clothing still shapes how people are received before they speak. Certain rooms expect certain shoes, certain meetings expect certain colors, certain professions expect certain styles that signal seriousness long before ideas are shared. The garments are different now, but the logic remains. Clothing still tells others where you belong. In Rome, this visible order made the city easier to navigate. Citizens recognized each other quickly. Officials were identified without introduction. Authority moved through crowds without needing explanation. Appearance created orientation. Like stars arranged across the night sky, these garments helped people understand where they stood and how they should move in relation to everyone else around them. The pattern was not random. It formed a map that anyone raised inside the city could read without effort. And once people learned to read that map, they rarely questioned it. They followed it. They trusted it. They adjusted themselves to match it. As you leave the steps behind and walk deeper into the forum once more, another pattern begins to emerge beside the folds of cloth and the signals of rank. Some people do not need garments to announce who they are. Their titles speak first. Before you see him, you hear his title. It moves ahead of him like a quiet announcement carried through the morning air. Someone nearby lowers their voice. Someone else steps slightly aside. A conversation pauses without needing to end. No signal has been given, and yet the change is unmistakable. A magistrate is approaching. No one asks what decisions he has made. No one checks what problems he has solved. No one requests evidence of his skill or judgment. The title alone is enough. In Rome, names were important. Titles were stronger. You begin to notice how quickly they travel through the streets. Senator, tribune, consul. Each word carries weight that does not need explanation. Each word creates space around the person who holds it. Each word invites obedience before conversation begins. This is not because everyone agrees with every decision made by these officials. Rome was full of disagreement. It was full of argument. It was full of people who spoke loudly in public squares and quietly in private rooms about the choices of those above them. But argument did not begin at the level of the title. The title itself stood first. Near the entrance of a large townhouse, a small group of clients gathers in the pale light before sunrise. They have arrived early, each hoping to greet the patron who lives inside. Their cloaks carry the scent of cool morning air and narrow streets still quiet from the night. One by one, they wait near the doorway, shifting their weight gently as the sky begins to brighten. This is the morning greeting. It happens every day. The door opens. The patron steps outside. But each client nods respectfully and speaks a brief greeting. No one speaks long. No one speaks loudly. Their presence itself is the message. They have come to show loyalty. He has come to show protection. Titles make this exchange possible without explanation. The patron does not need to remind them who he is. They already know. Across the city, thousands of similar moments unfold at the same hour. Clients stand outside houses. Officials walk through streets. Messengers carry instructions across districts. Soldiers receive orders from commanders they have never met before. The empire moves because titles travel faster than introductions. You begin to understand how useful this must have been in a city so large. Rome stretched across hills, markets, courtyards, temples, workshops, and narrow residential lanes. It held hundreds of thousands of people, each with their own business, their own concerns, their own obligations. Without titles, every interaction would require explanation. With titles, Explanation disappears. A single word replaces uncertainty. If someone is called consul, he must be obeyed. If someone is called tribune, he must be heard. If someone is called senator, he must be respected. The title becomes proof enough. This does not mean every official deserved trust. Rome knew that some officials made mistakes. It knew that some used authority poorly. It knew that some titles were carried by men who understood less than they claimed. But the system itself depended on recognition, not evaluation. People obeyed the title so that the city could continue moving. You walk past a small gathering near the edge of the forum where two men pause mid-conversation as another figure approaches. One of them steps back slightly, allowing the newcomer to pass without interruption. No one explains why. The title has already spoken. This quiet adjustment happens everywhere. A clerk stands when a magistrate enters the room. A messenger lowers his voice when addressing a senior official. A shopkeeper pauses his work briefly when a known patron passes nearby. Each movement is small. Each movement is automatic. Hierarchy becomes a habit of the body. Over time, this habit creates something comforting. When everyone understands who stands where in the order of the city, uncertainty becomes easier to manage. Decisions arrive from known directions. Instructions follow expected paths. Ye's authority feels predictable even when it is not always correct. Predictability creates calm. In a city as large as Rome, calm mattered. The clients near the townhouse doorway finish their greetings now. The patron nods once more before returning inside. The exchange has lasted only a few moments, yet its meaning will remain throughout the day. Each client leaves knowing that his place in the network of relationships surrounding the house is still secure. No document was signed, no announcement was made. The title was enough. Across the empire, the same pattern repeated in provinces far from the capital. A governor arrived in a distant town and was obeyed before anyone learned his habits. A commander issued orders to soldiers who had never spoken with him before. A messenger carried authority across mountains simply by naming the official who had sent him. Titles allowed obedience to travel without delay. You begin to recognize how familiar this still feels. Even now, introductions often begin with roles rather than names. Someone is presented as director, manager, advisor, or supervisor before anything else is known about them. The title arrives first. The person follows afterward. The habit is ancient. It began here, in streets where recognition mattered more than explanation, and where authority needed to move quickly across distance without stopping to justify itself each time it appeared. As you continue walking through the morning light, listening to greetings exchanged between citizens who already understand their places in the city's order, another quiet realization begins to take shape beside the sound of these titles. Sometimes authority did not need clothing. Sometimes it did not even need rank. Sometimes it needed only a certain expression on the face. By now, you have learned how to wait. You have learned how to sign your name into wax. You have learned how to recognize authority before anyone speaks. And slowly, almost without noticing, you begin to learn something else. When a decision does not go your way, the system is not expected to change. You are. The realization does not arrive loudly. No official announces it. No inscription on a wall explains it. Instead, it settles into everyday life through small, repeated experiences that feel ordinary at first and only later begin to reveal their shape. You are standing once more inside an administrative courtyard. A clerk examines the tablet you brought earlier. He reads it carefully, then pauses. His expression does not change. His voice remains calm. A seal is missing. The wording must be adjusted. The document must be rewritten. He returns the tablet to you. This moment contains no accusation, no frustration, no suggestion that anyone has failed. It simply continues the process exactly as the process expects to continue. You nod. You accept the tablet. You prepare to begin again. In Rome, mistakes rarely meant the system was incorrect. They meant something inside the request needed adjustment. Perhaps a witness was absent. Perhaps a phrase required clarification. Perhaps a boundary description needed another reference point. The solution was always the same: return, rewrite, or resubmit. The system remained steady while people moved around it like water, adjusting itself to the shape of a bowl. Marcia sits beside a small lamp now as evening settles across the courtyard walls. The flame flickers gently, casting narrow shadows across the tablet in front of her. She has already rewritten this petition once. She will rewrite it again tonight so that it matches the expectations of the office more precisely tomorrow. Her movements are calm, careful, unhurried. She does not complain about the process. She does not argue with the clerk who returned the document earlier. She simply corrects the wording and prepares the tablet again. This is not resignation. It is participation. Roman citizens understood something important about systems. Systems did not bend easily. Systems lasted longer than individuals. Systems carried memory from one generation to another through procedures that rarely changed. Adapting yourself to the system was easier than asking the system to adapt to you. You begin to notice how this habit appears everywhere. A merchant adjusts the language of a contract rather than challenging its structure. A farmer redraws a boundary description rather than disputing the office that requested it. A family gathers additional witnesses rather than questioning whether witnesses are necessary at all. Each adjustment confirms the same quiet rule. The process continues. Across the city, clerks sit beside shelves filled with tablets describing disputes that were corrected rather than contested. These tablets carry traces of erased words, rewritten lines, and additional marks added after the first version failed to meet expectations. That every correction strengthens the system because every correction accepts it. You might imagine that this pattern would create frustration. Sometimes it did. Rome was not a silent city. People argued, people complained, people debated decisions in markets and courtyards and narrow streets where voices carried easily between stone walls. But when it came to official procedure, argument rarely changed direction. Procedure remained. Over time, this created something remarkable. Citizens learned to interpret difficulty not as injustice, but as instruction. If a form returned unfinished, it meant the form required improvement. If a request stalled, it meant another step had been overlooked. If a decision arrived slowly, it meant the decision was being prepared correctly. Delay became reassurance. Correction became guidance. Structure became certainty. Marcia pauses now and lifts the stylus from the wax. She rereads the line she has just written. The wording matches the clerk's suggestion exactly. Tomorrow, she will carry the tablet back across the courtyard and present it again. She does not expect approval immediately. She expects progress. This expectation changes how people move through the city. Instead of resisting procedures, they anticipate them. Instead of questioning instructions, they prepare for repetition. Instead of measuring fairness by outcome, they measure success by completion. The request continues forward. That is enough. In Rome, it was possible to complain about individuals. A clerk might be careless. A witness might arrive late. A neighbor might describe a boundary incorrectly. These were ordinary problems with ordinary solutions. But suggesting that the structure itself was mistaken felt different. Structures were older than the people who used them. They carried authority simply by existing. Changing them required more than argument. It required permission, and permission moved slowly. So citizens adjusted themselves instead. This quiet adjustment made the empire easier to manage. Officials did not need to persuade every citizen individually. They only needed to maintain the structure. Once the structure remained steady, citizens learned how to move inside it on their own. Even now, the same habit feels familiar. A document returns for revision. Instructions arrive that repeat earlier steps. A request pauses without explanation. Still, the instinct is rarely to challenge the system itself. The instinct is to try again more carefully, rewrite, resubmit. Return tomorrow. Marcia closes the tablet gently and sets it beside the lamp. The wax surface cools as the flame grows smaller. Outside, footsteps echo faintly across the courtyard as another visitor leaves for the evening, carrying a document that will also need adjustment before morning. And as the last light settles against the stone walls, another quiet truth begins to take shape beside the steady rhythm of these repeated corrections. If the system never seemed wrong, someone else had to be. You are still inside the administrative building. The courtyard behind you has grown quieter now. Fewer voices move between the columns. The afternoon light rests gently across the stone floor, turning the air pale and slow. Somewhere nearby, a door opens and closes with the soft sound of wood brushing against wood. Nothing feels urgent here. Nothing is meant to. Along one wall stands a long wooden shelf filled with scrolls tied in narrow cords. Some are new and smooth. Others carry faint dust along their edges, as if they have been waiting longer than anyone clearly remembers. A clerk lifts one scroll from the shelf, studies the cord briefly, then carries it across the room and places it beside another stack without opening it. This movement is small. It is also important. In Rome, responsibility rarely stayed in one place for very long. Instead, it traveled. You watch as another tablet arrives at the same desk. The clerk examines the seal, nods once, and passes the tablet to the next room. He does not read the entire document. He does not question its contents. His task is not to decide. His task is to continue the process. The process itself is the path forward. A young clerk stands near the doorway, holding a scroll carefully in both hands. He hesitates only for a moment before stepping across the threshold into the next office. Inside, another official receives the scroll and places it beside several others already waiting there. No conversation follows. No explanation is required. The scroll has moved. That is enough. You begin to notice how gently responsibility shifts from one person to another inside this building. Each official completes one step. Each official confirms one detail. Each official adds one mark or one seal or one signature before passing the document onward again. No single person holds the entire decision. Instead, the decision grows slowly as it moves. This movement creates a curious kind of safety. If a mistake appears later, it does not belong to any one clerk alone. It belongs to the path the document followed. The process absorbs the weight that might otherwise fall on a single pair of shoulders. Responsibility rises upward like warm air lifting slowly through a quiet room. You can feel this pattern shaping behavior all around you. A messenger delivers a request and leaves immediately. A clerk records its arrival without commenting on its outcome. Another official confirms its position in the sequence. Each step is careful. Each step is limited. No one rushes ahead. No one steps outside the structure. The system moves forward even when individuals remain still. A faint breeze crosses the corridor, carrying the dry scent of old parchment and warmed wood. The young clerk who carried the scroll earlier now returns with empty hands. He does not ask what will happen next. He does not wait for the final decision. His task has already been completed. He has passed the responsibility forward. This quiet habit shaped how Roman administration functioned across the entire empire. In distant provinces, requests traveled through similar sequences of desks and offices. Messages moved from governors to assistants, from assistants to scribes, from scribes to archivists, and then onward again toward officials who might never meet the original writer at all. Each step mattered. No step solved everything. You begin to understand how this created stability. When responsibility is shared across many hands, decisions appear larger than any single person. They feel less personal. They feel more official. Even when outcomes are uncertain, the movement itself suggests order. Problems were not always solved quickly in Rome. They were handled carefully. Handling created patience. Handling created distance. Handling created respect for the structure that carried the decision forward. Nearby, another scroll arrives at the shelf where older documents rest. The clerk places it gently between two others and adjusts the cord so it lies flat. He does not open it. He does not need to know its contents. The scroll has entered the system. That is what matters. Over time, this pattern changed how citizens understood authority. Instead of expecting clear answers from individual officials, they learned to expect progress from procedures. If a request continued moving, the system was working. If the request stopped entirely, something unusual had happened. Movement itself became reassurance. You recognize this feeling more easily than you might expect. Even now, when a request travels from one department to another, when a message receives confirmation but not resolution, when instructions arrive in stages rather than all at once, the same quiet logic remains. The request is being handled. That is enough for today. Inside the corridor, footsteps pass again. A clerk carries another tablet toward a doorway where light falls across the threshold in a narrow rectangle. He disappears into the next room without hesitation. Somewhere beyond that doorway, another official will repeat the same careful motion once more. Responsibility continues its slow journey upward, and yet something remarkable happens alongside this movement, even when no single person seems to hold the answer. Even when decisions travel farther than the people who first requested them, authority itself remains steady in the minds of those who wait. People continue to trust the system, even when they do not fully understand how it works. You notice his face before you notice his words. He is seated above you, not very high, only a little higher than the crowd gathered in front of him, yet the difference is enough. The chair beneath him is curved and polished, its arms shaped carefully to hold his posture upright. He does not lean forward, he does not lean back. He remains still in a way that makes movement around him feel unnecessary. This stillness is not accidental. It is part of the work. The magistrate begins to speak. His voice is not loud, it does not need to be. The space around him carries the sound outward in slow, careful waves that reach the people standing below. Each sentence arrives separately, measured and complete, as though it has been shaped before it was spoken. You begin to notice something curious. He does not smile. Not because he is unhappy, not because he is unfriendly, but because smiling would change the meaning of the moment. In Rome, authority often appeared through restraint rather than warmth. A leader who spoke too quickly sounded uncertain. A leader who laughed too easily seemed careless. A leader who showed strong emotion risked suggesting that decisions were personal rather than structured. Seriousness created distance. Distance created trust. This trust did not depend on knowing the magistrate well. Many people listening to him today have never spoken with him before. Some do not know where he lives. Some do not know his family. Yet they stand quietly while he speaks, because his posture, his voice, and his expression together form something recognizable. They form authority. The raised chair beneath him helps shape this recognition. It is known as a curule chair, a seat used by certain officials when exercising their responsibilities in public settings. The chair is not large, it is not decorated with heavy carving. Yet its position signals that the person sitting upon it is not speaking as an individual citizen. He is speaking as the office itself. You feel this difference without needing explanation. The height of the chair changes how people listen. It changes how the magistrate pauses between sentences. It changes how the crowd arranges itself across the open space below him. Like space creates structure, structure creates attention. Nearby, a clerk adjusts a tablet and steps slightly to one side so the magistrate remains clearly visible from every angle. No instruction is given, the movement happens naturally. Everyone present understands that visibility strengthens authority as much as words do. The magistrate continues speaking. His sentences are calm, even, unhurried. He does not rush toward conclusions. He allows each phrase to settle before the next begins. This rhythm suggests confidence. It suggests that decisions are not being invented in the moment, but carried forward from something older and steadier than the speaker himself. You begin to notice how carefully his gestures are limited. One hand moves slightly when he emphasizes a point, then it returns to rest again. He does not pace across the platform. When he does not raise his voice sharply, he does not interrupt himself. Control becomes the message. Across Rome, similar scenes unfold every day. Senators speak in measured tones during debate. Commanders address soldiers without visible hesitation before battle formations begin to move. Judges deliver rulings without changing their expressions even when the crowd reacts around them. The pattern repeats often enough that people begin to expect it. Authority sounds calm. Authority moves slowly. Authority does not hurry. Over time, citizens learn to recognize seriousness as a signal that decisions belong to the structure rather than to the individual. A calm face suggests continuity. A steady voice suggests preparation. A controlled posture suggests reliability. The magistrate pauses now, allowing the final sentence to settle across the gathering before him. No one speaks while he waits. The silence itself becomes part of the announcement. It confirms that everyone present understands the weight of what has been said. Silence can carry authority just as clearly as speech. You begin to recognize how useful this performance must have been in a city as large as Rome. When thousands of people gathered in one place, they needed signals that could be understood immediately. Tone of voice, height of platform, stillness of posture, these became tools that allowed leadership to function without constant explanation. Like a careful craftsperson shaping wood with slow and deliberate strokes, Roman officials shaped authority through repeated gestures that taught the crowd how to listen. The craft required practice, when it also required patience. Nearby, a listener shifts slightly but does not interrupt. Another lowers his gaze briefly before raising it again. The entire gathering moves together in a rhythm that follows the magistrate's voice without needing instruction. Seriousness has become a shared language. Even now, the same language appears in unexpected places. A formal meeting begins and voices lower automatically. A speaker pauses before answering a question, and listeners become still. A person in a position of responsibility chooses careful words rather than quick ones. The gestures feel natural. They are very old. The magistrate rises slowly from the curule chair now, signaling that the announcement is complete. The crowd begins to move again, quietly at first. Then, with increasing confidence as conversations return to the open space around the platform. And as you step away from the gathering, carrying the memory of that still face and steady voice with you into the brightness of the forum once more, another realization begins to take shape beside the echo of his words. Authority was not only heard, it was built in stone. Before anyone speaks to you, the building has already begun. You feel it first in your footsteps. The sound changes as soon as you cross the threshold. Outside, the street carried noise easily. Voices overlapped, sandals struck uneven stone. Conversation moved freely through narrow lanes and open air. But inside this hall, every movement becomes slower, clearer, more deliberate. Your footsteps echo. The echo reminds you that you are not alone, even when no one is close beside you. The ceiling rises high above your head, farther than you expected. Light falls from narrow openings above the columns, not directly onto your face, but onto the floor ahead of you, guiding your steps forward through a space that feels wider than any house and quieter than any marketplace. This is a basilica, not a temple, not a private residence, not a place for trade in the ordinary sense. It is a place where decisions gather. You notice how the citizen beside you lowers his voice as soon as he enters. No one asks him to do this. No guard reminds him. No sign explains the rule. The space itself suggests it. He speaks more slowly now, more carefully, as if the walls are listening. In Rome, buildings did not simply hold activity, they shaped it. The basilica stands along the edge of the forum, where citizens bring disputes, agreements, and petitions that require recognition beyond the household. Its long interior stretches forward between rows of columns that divide the hall into orderly paths. At the far end, a raised platform marks the place where officials sit when hearing cases. The platform is not hidden. It is visible from almost everywhere inside the hall. Visibility creates expectation. Expectation creates attention. You begin to notice how the floor itself changes the way people walk. Smooth marble encourages steady movement rather than quick steps. Open space removes the comfort of crowding close together. The height of the ceiling slows conversation because voices carry farther than expected. The building teaches restraint without speaking. A group of visitors enters behind you now. Their sandals strike the marble with a sharper echo than they intended. One of them pauses, glances upward, then adjusts his pace so his footsteps become quieter. No one corrects him. He corrects himself. This is how architecture becomes instruction. Across Rome, similar spaces repeat this lesson. The forum itself opens wide enough to make voices travel across distances that surprise first-time visitors. Temple steps lift citizens above street level before they reach sacred doorways. Administrative halls place officials at the far end of long rooms so that movement toward them feels deliberate rather than casual. Distance creates preparation. Preparation creates respect. You walk farther into the basilica now and feel the air grow cooler as the shadows deepen between the columns. The citizen beside you slows again as he approaches the raised platform where a magistrate will soon arrive. He does not cross the open space quickly. He waits at its edge until he understands where he is expected to stand. The floor has already told him. The columns have already told him. The platform has already told him. Roman architects understood something quiet and powerful. People behave differently when they enter large spaces designed to be seen rather than lived in. A house invites movement. A marketplace invites conversation. A basilica invites attention. Attention supports authority. High ceilings make voices seem smaller. Long halls make movement feel visible. Raised platforms suggest direction even before anyone stands upon them. These features shape behavior gently but reliably. You begin to notice how similar patterns appear in other buildings nearby. Courthouse halls place officials above eye level. Treasury buildings surround entrances with thick stone walls that suggest permanence. Archive rooms hold shelves higher than a person can easily reach, reminding visitors that records belong to the structure rather than the individual. Stone becomes a language. It speaks slowly, it speaks quietly, but it speaks clearly. The citizen beside you reaches the center of the hall and pauses again. His shoulders settle. His voice lowers further as he speaks to a clerk standing near the platform steps. The conversation remains brief. No one laughs. No one interrupts. The building has already set the tone. Outside, the forum continues its ordinary movement. Vendors call to passers-by. Messengers hurry between offices. Children weave through crowds near the fountain. Yet, inside this hall, time seems to slow just enough to separate decision from noise. This separation is not accidental. It allows authority to appear steady. Across the empire, basilicas and administrative halls repeated this design so that citizens entering unfamiliar towns could still recognize where decisions belonged. Even without knowing the officials inside, they understood the structure of the space. Columns marked direction, platforms marked responsibility. Height marked importance, recognition created confidence, confidence created obedience. Many centuries later, similar buildings continue to shape behavior in quiet ways. People lower their voices when entering courtrooms. They pause before approaching desks set behind wide counters. They wait at marked distances even when no one instructs them to do so. The spaces still speak. They still guide movement. They still prepare attention before words begin. As you leave the shadowed hall and step back into the brightness of the forum, the echo of your footsteps lingers behind you for a moment before disappearing into the larger sound of the city. And as the sunlight returns to your shoulders and the open square spreads once more in every direction around you, another quieter tool of Roman authority begins to come into view. Not stone, not height, not distance, something even more lasting: shame. Before anything begins, people are already gathering, not quickly, not urgently, just gradually, as though drawn by something they already expect to see. You follow the movement without needing to ask why. A small crowd forms near the edge of the forum, where a temporary wooden platform has been set in place beside a row of stone columns. The platform is simple, not decorated, not raised very high. Yet it stands just above the level of the square, making it visible from many directions at once. Visibility is the purpose. A shopkeeper steps away from his stall nearby and joins the outer edge of the gathering. He does not close his shop completely. He leaves it half open, trusting that he will return soon. Like everyone else here, he expects the moment to unfold slowly enough that ordinary business can pause without disappearing. In Rome, justice often appeared in public, not hidden behind doors, not separated from daily life, seen, heard, remembered. A magistrate arrives and steps onto the platform. Two clerks stand beside him holding tablets. A small space opens in the crowd as another figure is brought forward. No one shouts. No one presses closer than necessary. The gathering remains calm, attentive, patient. This calmness is part of the event. Punishment in Rome did not always depend on force. Sometimes it depended on attention. When people witnessed a judgment together, The memory of that moment spread outward across the city more quickly than any written announcement could travel. The shopkeeper beside you shifts his weight slightly as the magistrate begins to speak. He listens carefully, not because the case concerns him personally, but because the lesson concerns everyone. A fine might empty a purse, a prison might remove a person for a time, but shame remained visible long after both had ended. The magistrate reads the complaint slowly. The accused stands quietly beside the platform. Witnesses step forward one at a time, confirming details that many in the crowd already seem to recognize. No one interrupts. No one laughs. The seriousness of the moment holds the square in place. You begin to understand how carefully this scene has been arranged. The platform lifts the speakers slightly above the listeners. The open square allows many people to see at once. The reading of the complaint gives the event a clear beginning and a clear end. Everything is designed to make the memory remain. The shopkeeper lowers his gaze briefly as the judgment is announced. He is not involved. He is not responsible. Yet the decision still reaches him. Tomorrow, when he speaks with customers near his stall, he will repeat what he has seen. Others will repeat it again. The story will move through streets and courtyards long after the platform has been removed. Memory travels easily through a crowd. Reputation travels with it. Across Rome, similar scenes unfold again and again. Citizens observe disputes between neighbors. Merchants witness rulings about contracts. Soldiers hear judgments concerning discipline. Each event becomes part of a shared understanding about what behavior belongs inside the city and what behavior does not. The crowd itself becomes the record. You notice how quietly people respond as the hearing ends. No cheering follows. No shouting rises from the square. The platform remains still for a moment longer before the magistrate steps down and the clerks gather their tablets. The event is complete. Its influence is not. Shame works differently from punishment. Punishment ends when the penalty ends. Shame continues wherever memory travels. It follows a person through markets and streets, through conversations and introductions, through future agreements that now carry a shadow of what was seen before. The Romans understood this very well. They placed trials where citizens could watch them. They announced decisions where neighbors could hear them. They allowed reputation to do work that guards alone could never complete. The shopkeeper returns slowly toward his stall now. He adjusts the cloth covering his table and resumes arranging his goods as though nothing unusual has happened. Yet the expression on his face suggests that something has changed slightly inside his thoughts. But he has seen what happens when expectations are broken. He has seen how the city responds. He will remember. Around him, others carry the same memory away in different directions. Some will speak about it tonight at dinner. Some will mention it quietly tomorrow morning. Some will simply adjust their own behavior without saying anything at all. The lesson continues long after the platform disappears. Like a constellation appearing in the night sky, the event remains visible even after the figures who created it have moved on. People do not need to look directly at it to know it is there. They navigate by it without realizing they are doing so. This quiet guidance shapes the city more gently than force could manage. Even now, similar moments appear in different forms. A mistake becomes widely known. A reputation changes. A story spreads from one conversation to another. No official announcement is required. The memory itself does the work. The crowd in the forum begins to dissolve now. Conversations return. Footsteps cross the square again. The shopkeeper finishes arranging his goods and greets a customer with the same calm voice he used earlier in the morning. Life continues. Yet something else begins to take shape beside these memories of judgment and reputation. Soon, you begin to notice that even silence can become a signal of obedience. Before the city is fully awake, people are already moving. The streets are still dim. A pale line of light rests just above the rooftops, not yet strong enough to warm the stones beneath your feet. Somewhere nearby, a shutter opens quietly. A cartwheel turns once and then becomes still again. The day has not begun loudly. It begins with greetings. You turn into a narrow street where several figures stand outside a townhouse doorway. They are not speaking much. They are not knocking loudly. They are simply waiting. This waiting has a purpose. The door will open soon. A client stands among them, his cloak folded carefully over one arm to keep it clean from the dust of the street. He arrived before sunrise because he understands that this moment matters. The greeting he is about to offer will last only a few seconds, yet it will shape the rest of his day. This is the morning visit. In Rome, it is called the salutatio, the daily exchange between patron and client that confirms relationships without needing explanation. The patron offers recognition, the client offers loyalty. But neither speaks at length, neither needs to. The ritual itself carries the meaning. You watch as the doorway opens and the patron steps outside. One by one, the clients greet him quietly. Each greeting is brief, each gesture is controlled. Some lower their heads slightly. Others speak a formal phrase of respect that has been repeated so often it no longer feels like a sentence. It feels like a sound. The patron nods once to each visitor. Sometimes he speaks a few words, sometimes he does not. The exchange remains calm either way. What matters is not conversation. What matters is presence. Presence confirms connection. Connection confirms stability. Across the city, thousands of similar greetings unfold at this same hour. Clients gather outside houses. Shopkeepers greet suppliers before opening their stalls. Neighbors acknowledge one another at street corners before continuing toward fountains or workshops. The greetings are short, predictable, familiar. This predictability prevents misunderstanding before it begins. When everyone knows how an interaction will unfold, uncertainty disappears. No one wonders whether to speak first. No one wonders how long to remain. No one wonders whether respect has been shown clearly enough. The ritual answers these questions in advance. You notice how the client beside you waits until his turn arrives rather than stepping forward early. He does not interrupt another greeting. He does not hurry the exchange. He understands the order without needing instruction. Order protects dignity. When everyone follows the same pattern, no one risks embarrassment by guessing incorrectly what to do next. Inside the doorway, the patron pauses briefly after the final greeting before returning indoors. The entire exchange has lasted only a few moments, yet its effect will remain visible throughout the day. The clients leave with quiet confidence that their connection has been renewed. The patron returns inside, knowing that his network of relationships remains intact. Nothing has been negotiated, nothing has been written. Still, something important has happened. Politeness in Rome was not simply kindness, it was structure. It shaped how strangers approached one another. It shaped how neighbors shared space. It shaped how requests were made and how refusals were understood. Even small gestures, like stepping aside on a narrow street or lowering one's voice when addressing a senior figure, carried meaning that everyone recognized. The city depended on these signals. Without them, every encounter would require explanation. With them, interaction moved smoothly from one moment to the next. You begin to see how silence itself becomes part of this language. A pause before speaking shows respect. A lowered gaze confirms acknowledgement. A brief nod replaces a longer conversation that might otherwise become uncertain. Silence organizes movement just as clearly as speech. Nearby, another group of clients finishes their greetings and walks away together toward the forum. Their conversation remains quiet. Their steps remain steady. The ritual has already prepared them for the day ahead. This preparation matters more than it first appears. When interactions follow familiar patterns, conflict becomes less likely. People do not need to test boundaries because the boundaries are already visible. They do not need to negotiate respect because respect has already been demonstrated. Predictability creates calm. Calm allows the city to continue moving without interruption. You recognize this feeling easily. Even now, greetings shape how meetings begin, how requests are introduced, how disagreements remain contained. A familiar phrase opens a conversation. A practiced tone prevents misunderstanding. A short exchange at the beginning of a discussion creates space for everything that follows. These habits feel natural. They are very old. The client who stood beside you at the doorway now disappears into the widening brightness of the street. His greeting has been completed. His place within the patron's network remains secure for another day. And as the city begins to fill with movement and voices once more, something else begins to reveal itself quietly behind these rituals of politeness. Hierarchy is no longer something people only see. It is something they begin to carry inside themselves. By now, hierarchy no longer feels surprising. You have seen it in clothing. You have heard it in titles. You have walked through buildings shaped to guide your movements before anyone spoke. And gradually, almost without noticing when the change began, you start to recognize something quieter still. Age itself carries authority. You see it in the way conversations begin. An older man enters a courtyard where several younger citizens are already speaking. No one announces his arrival. No one asks for silence. Yet the conversation shifts. Voices soften. Someone steps aside slightly to create space for him to pass. Another waits before finishing a sentence that had already begun. Respect arrives before explanation. This is not written into law in every situation. It does not require an official seal. It does not depend on a title carved into stone. Instead, it grows from something slower and older than either of those things. Time itself becomes a signal. A young messenger moves quickly across the forum carrying a folded tablet in both hands. The wax seal pressed along its edge confirms that the message has already passed through careful preparation before reaching him. He does not open it. He does not question its contents. His task is simple: deliver. He reaches the steps of a shaded portico where an older senator sits with several companions. The senator's clothing marks his office. But it is not the clothing alone that shapes the moment. His posture is steady. His voice, when he speaks, is unhurried. The younger men standing nearby wait for him to finish before responding, even when they already understand what he will say. The messenger bows his head slightly and places the tablet into the senator's hand. The instruction has arrived. The decision will follow. In Rome, age often guided the direction of decisions even when younger citizens carried the movement of the city itself. Younger soldiers marched along distant roads. Younger clerks copied contracts late into the evening. Younger laborers repaired walls, lifted cargo, and carried supplies through narrow streets that never fully rested. Yet when discussion began, older voices often spoke first. In the Senate itself, seniority shaped the order of speech. Those who had served longer were invited to express their views earlier, allowing experience to guide the rhythm of debate before newer members added their perspectives. The arrangement was not always perfect. It did not always produce the best solution. But it produced something Rome valued deeply: continuity. Continuity made decisions feel stable even when circumstances changed. It allowed policies to appear connected to earlier generations rather than invented suddenly by the present one. It gave the city a sense that its direction followed a path already known rather than a path still being discovered. The senator breaks the wax seal slowly now and reads the tablet without hurry. The messenger waits nearby, standing still enough that his shadow barely shifts across the paving stones beneath his feet. He does not expect a long conversation. He expects acknowledgement. The instruction has been received. That is enough. You begin to notice how often this pattern repeats across households as well as public spaces. In family courtyards, elders speak first when disagreements appear. At shared meals, seating arrangements reflect age as much as status. Younger relatives listen before offering suggestions of their own. No one needs to explain why. Age has already spoken. This habit shaped expectations long before anyone entered the Senate chamber. Children watched older relatives guide decisions about property, marriage arrangements, and household responsibilities. They learned early that experience carried weight not because it guaranteed correctness, but because it connected the present to the past. Rome trusted memory. Age suggested memory. Memory suggested reliability. The young messenger shifts his weight slightly as the senator finishes reading. A brief nod follows. No long instructions are given. The messenger understands that the tablet will now move forward through another stage of decision-making guided by hands older than his own. He turns and begins the walk back across the forum. His role has been completed. This balance between youth and age shaped the movement of the empire in subtle ways. Younger citizens carried news across long distances. Younger officers organized supplies along roads that stretched beyond the horizon. Younger workers built walls and aqueducts that supported cities they might never fully see. Yet, direction remained steady because older voices guided where effort should travel. The pattern resembled a shared meal prepared slowly across generations. Younger hands gathered the grain. Older hands decided how it should be baked. Together, the process produced something that felt familiar even when the ingredients changed from season to season. You recognize something of this rhythm even now. In many gatherings, people still pause before speaking when someone older begins a sentence. In workplaces, experience often shapes decisions even when energy belongs to younger hands. In families, advice from elders continues to guide choices that stretch beyond a single moment. The habit feels natural. It feels reasonable. It feels almost invisible. As the messenger disappears into the movement of the square once more, another realization begins to form quietly beside the steady influence of age across Rome's streets and courtyards. Hierarchy is no longer something people simply follow. It is something they begin to expect in every part of life, even in friendship and opportunity. By now, you no longer need to look for hierarchy. You feel it before you see it. It moves quietly through streets, through courtyards, through doorways where conversations begin and end without explanation. It shapes where people stand, where they sit when they speak, and sometimes even how long they remain silent. You notice it most clearly during gatherings. Today, the city is preparing for a public festival. Benches have been arranged along the edge of an open space near the forum. Cloth awnings stretch above them, softening the sunlight and casting long shadows across the stone pavement. Families arrive slowly, carrying baskets, adjusting garments, guiding children forward through the growing crowd. No one announces where each person should sit. Still, everyone seems to know. A family pauses near the edge of the seating area. The father glances briefly toward the front rows, then toward the middle, then toward the benches farther back where several neighbors are already settling themselves. No words are exchanged. A decision is made quietly. They move toward the middle. The movement feels natural. In Rome, social position often appeared without instruction. People learned early where they belonged within the structure of the city. Some families carried names that opened doors easily. Others carried obligations that shaped where they stood in public gatherings. Some citizens possessed full political rights. Others held partial recognition that allowed participation in certain spaces, but not all. These differences rarely required explanation. They were already understood. The front rows near public events often belonged to senators and officials whose presence marked the importance of the occasion. Behind them sat citizens whose standing allowed participation, but not leadership. Farther back gathered visitors, clients, workers, and families who shared the celebration without expecting visibility. Everyone could see, everyone adjusted. The arrangement did not feel like a rule. It felt like weather, like the direction of a steady wind that guides movement without needing to be announced. The family beside you settles onto their bench. The mother smooths the edge of her garment before sitting. A younger child looks toward the front rows with curiosity, then turns back as conversation begins among neighbors nearby. No one explains why they are sitting where they are. No explanation is needed. Citizenship itself contained many layers in Rome. Some people could vote in assemblies, others could not. Some could hold office. Others participated through relationships with patrons rather than through direct authority. Freed individuals carried legal recognition, but still moved differently through public space than those born into established families. Each layer shaped expectation. Expectation shaped behavior. Behavior shaped opportunity. You begin to notice how these differences extend beyond public seating. In households, servants move quietly along the edges of courtyards rather than through the center. In markets, certain merchants speak first, while others wait for invitations before joining conversation. In legal settings, some citizens stand closer to officials than others without needing permission. Position becomes habit. Habit becomes identity. Across the festival space, a group of younger men hesitates near the front benches before stepping back and choosing seats farther away. No one corrects them. No one directs them. They adjust themselves automatically, guided by something they have learned gradually over many years. This quiet adjustment creates stability. When everyone understands where they belong, movement becomes smoother, disputes over position appear less often, conversations begin without confusion. Ceremonies unfold without interruption. Hierarchy becomes a map. And once people learn to read that map, they carry it with them everywhere. You begin to recognize how early this learning begins. Children watch where their parents sit. They observe who speaks first during gatherings. They notice which neighbors are greeted differently in the street. Without formal instruction, they absorb the structure around them as naturally as they learn the direction of familiar roads. Over time, the structure feels permanent. It feels reasonable. It feels almost invisible. The festival begins now. Music rises from the far edge of the square where performers gather beneath a temporary canopy. The benches fill gradually. Voices soften as attention shifts toward the center of the event. Yet even as the celebration unfolds, the arrangement of seating continues to shape the space quietly. Front, middle, edge. Each position carries meaning. Like clouds moving across the sky in patterns that repeat from season to season, these arrangements guide the movement of the city without needing explanation. People navigate them instinctively, adjusting themselves in small ways that rarely attract attention but always influence opportunity. A messenger passes along the edge of the gathering, delivering a folded tablet to someone seated near the front. The exchange happens quickly, almost unnoticed by those farther back. Yet its meaning is clear. Access travels through rank. The family beside you watches the performers now, their attention settled comfortably within the space they have chosen. They do not appear dissatisfied. They do not appear excluded. They appear exactly where they expected to be. Expectation creates calm. Calm allows hierarchy to continue without resistance, and as the music drifts gently across the benches and the afternoon light begins to soften above the awnings, another realization begins to form quietly beside the arrangement of seats and the steady movement of the crowd. People did not always accept hierarchy because they were forced to. Sometimes they accepted it because it made the world feel predictable. By now, hierarchy no longer feels like something placed around you. It begins to feel like something supporting you. You walk through a colonnaded street where merchants are opening their shutters for the day. The sound of wooden panels sliding into place echoes softly beneath the stone arches. A clerk passes by carrying a bundle of folded tablets tied together with narrow cord. A messenger pauses briefly beside a doorway, then continues without hesitation. Everything moves in an expected direction. Expected movement creates comfort. Ahead of you, a merchant stands beside a narrow counter arranged with small jars and folded cloth bundles ready for exchange. He is waiting for a document confirming the arrival of a shipment that traveled along the river earlier in the week. The goods themselves are already stored nearby. What he needs now is recognition. Recognition arrives in the form of a seal. A clerk approaches and places a tablet carefully onto the counter. The merchant does not open it immediately. He does not read every line. Instead, he studies the seal pressed into the wax at its edge. The mark is clear. The shape is familiar. The authority behind it is known. He nods once. That's enough. In Rome, seals often carried more weight than explanation. A stamped surface suggested that someone within the structure of the city had already confirmed what needed to be confirmed. The merchant did not need to repeat the process himself. He did not need to investigate each detail of the shipment again. The seal had done the work. This quiet trust made daily life possible in a city filled with movement. Goods arrived from distant ports, messages crossed provinces, agreements passed between households that had never met before. Without recognizable signals of authority, each exchange would have required negotiation from the beginning. Recognition saved time. Recognition reduced uncertainty. Recognition allowed people to move forward without hesitation. The merchant lifts the tablet now and places it beside his ledger without opening it further. He will record its presence later. For now, the seal is enough to begin distributing the goods that depend upon it. You begin to notice how often this pattern appears across the city. Citizens accept instructions that carry official markings. Messengers follow routes established by earlier decisions. Clerks copy records whose structure has already been agreed upon long before they arrived at their desks. Hierarchy simplifies movement. It removes the need to decide everything again. In a world without printed maps, without rapid communication, and without centralized storage of information available at every corner, predictability created safety. When people knew where authority rested, they knew where to go. When they recognized official markings, they knew what to trust. The system became a guide. Like a careful craftsperson following the grain of wood rather than cutting against it, Roman citizens learned to move along the lines already shaped by earlier generations. The path required less effort. The direction required fewer questions. Comfort grew quietly from repetition. Nearby, another merchant receives a similar tablet from a passing clerk. He does not pause long enough to examine it closely. He places it with several others already resting beside his counter, each carrying a seal that confirms something he does not need to reconsider. Trust travels through these small marks. You begin to understand how this trust shaped expectations far beyond the marketplace. Soldiers followed orders that arrived through chains of command they never fully saw. Families accepted property arrangements confirmed by earlier agreements. Travelers relied on road markers placed by officials whose names they would never know. Authority became predictable. Predictability became reassuring. This reassurance did not remove uncertainty entirely. Rome remained a large and complicated city filled with unexpected events. Ships arrived late, roads required repair, disputes appeared without warning. Yet the structure surrounding these uncertainties made them easier to manage. The merchant finishes arranging his goods now and steps back from the counter with a small movement that suggests satisfaction rather than doubt. He does not question whether the seal is correct. He does not request another confirmation. The mark itself belongs to the system, and the system has already been accepted. Acceptance becomes habit. Habit becomes trust. Over time, trust in structure reduces the need for constant choice. When authority feels stable, people no longer need to evaluate every instruction separately. They can follow established paths with confidence that others are following them as well. Freedom requires decisions. Decisions require uncertainty. Uncertainty requires effort. Hierarchy reduces effort. This is why predictable authority often felt safer than complete independence. It allowed citizens to move through the city without needing to measure every step themselves. It allowed merchants to exchange goods without investigating every journey. It allowed households to plan for the future, using arrangements that had already been recognized by earlier generations. Structure carried responsibility forward. The merchant closes his ledger now and steps into the street where the colonnade opens toward the Forum once again. The seal remains resting quietly beside his records, still unopened, still trusted, still enough. And as the sound of footsteps returns to the rhythm of the morning market around you, another realization begins to take shape beside this steady confidence in official marks and familiar procedures. Some of Rome's strongest rules did not need explanation at all. By now, the rules of the city no longer feel like rules. They feel like memory. You walk through a quieter street as evening settles across the rooftops. The air has changed slightly. Daytime voices have softened. Lamps begin to appear one by one beside doorways, their light resting gently against plaster walls that have seen many seasons pass without needing to change. People are still moving, but they are moving more slowly now. An older man stands near the entrance to his house as a neighbor approaches along the narrow path between the buildings. The exchange that follows is brief. A greeting, a nod, a pause that lasts only long enough to confirm recognition before both continue toward their doors. Neither of them thinks about the gesture. Neither of them questions it. They have repeated it for many years. In Rome, this kind of repetition had a name. It was known as the custom of the ancestors, the quiet expectation that certain things should continue simply because they had always continued before. It did not belong to one office or one law. It belonged to the city itself. Tradition became instruction. Instruction became habit. Habit became certainty. You begin to notice how many actions unfold without explanation as evening gathers around you. A shopkeeper closes his shutters in the same order each night. A family arranges lamps along the courtyard wall before the meal begins. A servant places water near the doorway exactly where it has always been placed. No one asks why. The action answers its own question. The elder beside the doorway repeats the greeting once more as another neighbor passes. His voice is calm, his movement is familiar. The exchange does not require attention because it has already become part of the rhythm of the street. This rhythm connects people to those who lived here before them. When a gesture repeats across generations, it begins to feel older than any individual who performs it. It carries a quiet authority that does not depend on explanation or approval. It simply continues. Across Rome, citizens relied on these inherited patterns to guide decisions that might otherwise have felt uncertain. Families arranged marriages according to expectations passed down through earlier generations. Households divided responsibilities according to customs older than anyone present in the courtyard. Officials followed procedures whose origins were rarely discussed but always respected. The past moved forward through repetition. You begin to understand how comforting this must have been. In a city where laws could change and offices rotated from year to year, tradition remained steady. It offered direction when new situations appeared. It provided answers before questions were fully formed. Certainty traveled quietly through habit. Nearby, a young boy watches the elder repeat his greeting once again as another neighbor approaches. The boy does not ask why the words are spoken in that particular order. He does not ask why the gesture begins with a nod rather than a handshake. He simply watches. Later, he will repeat the same movement himself. This is how tradition survives, not through instruction alone, but through observation, repeated often enough to become natural. Across the empire, these similar habits shaped daily life in ways that rarely appeared in official records. People visited certain shrines before journeys because their parents had done so. They prepared meals in familiar patterns because their grandparents had done the same. They arranged seating in courtyards. According to expectations, no one needed to explain aloud. Tradition did not require agreement. It required continuation. You notice how even written procedures sometimes followed this same quiet logic. A clerk copies a form requesting information that has already been recorded earlier in the week. He does not remove the repeated step. He does not shorten the process. The form exists because it has always existed. And so it remains. Over time, repetition becomes easier than revision. When everyone already understands the sequence of actions, changing it would require effort that few people consider necessary. The familiar path continues because it is familiar. The elder closes his door now and the street grows quieter still. Lamps flicker along the walls. Footsteps fade toward distant courtyards. The evening settles into a pattern that feels older than the buildings themselves. Like a small animal following the same narrow trail through tall grass night after night, tradition moves through the city along routes worn smooth by countless earlier steps. No map is required. The path remembers itself. You recognize something similar even now. Many routines continue long after their original purpose has disappeared. People repeat greetings whose meanings have changed. They follow procedures whose beginnings are difficult to trace. They arrange their days according to patterns that feel natural simply because they have always been there. The habit becomes the explanation. The explanation becomes unnecessary. And as the last voices fade along the narrow street and the elder's doorway disappears into shadow, another realization begins to take shape quietly beside the steady persistence of these inherited gestures. Some rules remain long after the reasons for them have been forgotten. You enter a quieter part of the city now. The streets here are narrower, the voices softer, the movement slower. Lamps burn steadily beside doorways that do not open often during the evening hours. Somewhere ahead, a narrow corridor leads into a building whose purpose is not immediately visible from the outside. Inside, the air changes. It becomes still, cool, careful. This is where records sleep. Along the walls stand wooden shelves filled with scrolls tied in narrow cords that have faded slightly with time. Some cords remain tight and clean, suggesting recent use. Others have loosened just enough to show that they have not been untied for many seasons. The shelves rise higher than a person can easily reach without assistance, reminding visitors that these documents belong more to the structure than to any individual hand. A scribe sits at a narrow table beneath a small lamp whose light rests quietly across the surface of a wax tablet in front of him. He copies a record from an older scroll into a newer tablet with steady movements that do not hurry toward completion. He does not ask whether the record will be needed again. He copies it because it exists. In Rome, preservation often mattered more than revision. Procedures remained even when their original purpose had grown faint. Records continued to be copied even when their contents had already been replaced by newer agreements. Forms continued to be repeated even when earlier versions still rested safely on nearby shelves. Continuity created confidence. Confidence created stability. The scribe pauses briefly to adjust the angle of the tablet so the lamp's light falls more clearly across the surface. The wax carries faint marks from earlier writing that has been smoothed away, leaving shallow traces beneath the new lines he is adding. Layers of memory remain even when the words themselves change. You begin to notice how carefully the archive preserves not only information, but habits. A document describing a boundary agreement is copied again, even though the boundary has already been confirmed several times before. A record of citizenship status is rewritten, although the family it describes has lived in the same district for generations. A tax account is preserved long after the official who first recorded it has been replaced by someone younger who never met him. Nothing disappears quickly here. Each layer remains beside the next. Across Rome, similar archives existed in offices, temples, and administrative buildings where clerks worked quietly to maintain connections between past decisions and present ones. Even when circumstances changed, earlier records remained available, reminding citizens that today's arrangements grew from yesterday's agreements rather than appearing suddenly without explanation. Stability depended on memory. Memory depended on preservation. The scribe finishes copying one section of the record and gently smooths the edge of the wax before continuing with the next. He does not expect anyone to question the necessity of his work. The existence of the record itself justifies its continuation. You begin to understand how easily procedures can survive beyond their original purpose when they become part of a larger structure. Once a step enters the sequence of official work, removing it requires attention that few people have reason to give. The step continues because it belongs to the sequence, like a distant constellation that remains visible in the night sky long after the travelers who first named it have disappeared. These procedures continue to guide movement even when their beginnings are no longer remembered clearly. The archive grows quietly through repetition. Another clerk enters the corridor carrying a bundle of scrolls tied together with a narrow cord. He places them on a shelf beside others that appear nearly identical. He does not compare their contents. He does not remove older versions. He simply adds the new bundle to the row that already exists. Addition feels safer than removal. Removal feels uncertain. Across the empire, this habit shaped how institutions responded to change. New regulations were added beside older ones rather than replacing them entirely. Additional confirmations were required alongside earlier confirmations rather than instead of them. Procedures lengthened gradually until their origins became difficult to trace. The structure became deeper with time. Depth created reassurance. Reassurance encouraged continuation. You notice how the corridor itself reflects this pattern. Doorways open into smaller rooms filled with additional shelves. Each room holds records connected to another room farther inside. The deeper you walk, the older the documents become. Yet, even the oldest scrolls remain tied carefully in place, waiting quietly for a reader who may never arrive. The scribe closes the tablet now and sets it beside the lamp. The new copy rests next to the older scroll from which it was taken. Neither replaces the other. Both remain together. Over time, this layering of records shaped expectations far beyond the archive walls. Citizens learned to accept procedures whose beginnings were difficult to explain because the procedures themselves appeared stable. If a step had existed for many years, it must still be necessary. Longevity became proof proof became habit. Even now, similar patterns appear wherever institutions preserve earlier decisions rather than removing them entirely. Meetings continue because meetings have always existed. Forms repeat questions already answered elsewhere. Records accumulate until their original purpose becomes difficult to see clearly. The structure remembers even when people forget. The corridor grows quieter as the scribe extinguishes the lamp and leaves the room. The shelves remain in shadow, holding their layers of memory in careful silence. Nothing inside them moves quickly. Nothing inside them disappears easily. And as you step back into the narrow street where evening air settles gently against the stone walls once more, another realization begins to form beside the quiet persistence of these preserved procedures. Eventually, something unexpected begins to change. Work itself starts to feel like a ritual. Before the city begins speaking, someone is already working. The sky is still pale and quiet above the rooftops. A faint line of light rests along the eastern horizon, not yet strong enough to warm the stones beneath your feet. Most doors remain closed, most shutters are still fastened. Yet in a narrow courtyard between two rows of houses, a figure is already awake. A laborer moves slowly across the paving stones with a broom made from bundled reeds. The sound is gentle, soft, rhythmic, but each movement gathers yesterday's dust and carries it toward the edge of the courtyard where it disappears into a small pile that will soon be cleared away. No one watches him closely. No announcement marks the beginning of his work. Still, the action feels important. In Rome, effort itself carried meaning. Long before offices opened and merchants arranged their goods, the city expected visible signs that its people were contributing to its order. Work was not only necessary for survival, it was evidence of belonging. It showed that a person accepted their place within the shared rhythm of the community. The laborer pauses briefly to adjust his grip on the broom before continuing across the courtyard. His movements remain steady, not hurried, not uncertain. He has performed this task many mornings before. He will perform it again tomorrow. Repetition gives the action weight. Across Rome, similar scenes unfold at the same hour. Bakers prepare ovens before the streets fill with customers. Messengers begin their routes before the forum gathers its voices. Clerks arrange tablets on wooden desks before officials arrive to review them. The city wakes through work. You begin to notice how closely effort is connected to reputation. A citizen who appeared busy seemed reliable. A neighbor who fulfilled daily responsibilities earned quiet trust. A worker who arrived early confirmed loyalty without needing to explain it aloud. Activity became a language. Stillness carried uncertainty. This did not mean that rest was forbidden. Rome understood the value of festivals, shared meals, and evenings spent in conversation beneath courtyard lamps. Yet even during these quieter hours, the expectation remained that each person would return to their responsibilities when morning arrived. Continuity created confidence. Confidence created belonging. The laborer finishes sweeping one section of the courtyard and moves toward another where fallen leaves have gathered beside a narrow drain. The sound of the broom changes slightly as it crosses uneven stone, producing a softer rhythm that echoes briefly against the walls before fading again. The sound is small, but it is heard. In many parts of the city, citizens measured one another not only by wealth or clothing or titles, but by effort. A merchant who opened his stall regularly earned respect even without influence. A messenger who completed his route reliably gained recognition even without property. A clerk who copied records carefully strengthened his position within the structure of the office. Work created visibility. Visibility created identity. Over time, this connection shaped how people understood themselves. Instead of asking only who they were by birth, they began to ask how they contributed by action. The answer appeared each morning in the tasks they repeated: sweep, carry, record, deliver, build. These movements formed a quiet introduction that required no words. The laborer sets the broom aside now and lifts a small basket filled with dust and leaves. He carries it toward the edge of the courtyard and empties it into a narrow channel that leads toward the street beyond. The movement is simple, yet it completes something that began long before anyone else arrived. Completion matters. Rome valued effort not only because it produced results, but because it showed discipline. Discipline suggested reliability. Reliability suggested loyalty. Loyalty connected individuals to the larger structure of the city without requiring constant supervision. A person who worked regularly could be trusted to remain part of the shared order. Across the empire, this expectation shaped citizenship itself. Soldiers demonstrated loyalty through training and service. Farmers confirmed belonging through cultivation of land assigned to their care. Artisans strengthened communities through the steady production of tools and goods that supported daily life. Each action repeated the same quiet message: you are part of this place. Even now, echoes of this message remain familiar. People continue to measure themselves through activity. They describe their days through tasks completed. They introduce themselves through the work they perform. Effort still signals connection long before titles or possessions appear. The habit is ancient. It began in courtyards like this one, where the first sound of the morning was not conversation, but movement. The laborer rests the broom against the wall and pauses for a moment as the sunlight finally reaches the edge of the courtyard floor. The day has begun. Others will arrive soon. Doors will open, voices will return. The quiet rhythm of sweeping will disappear beneath the larger sound of the city. Yet, its meaning remains. Work has already spoken. And as the streets fill once more with footsteps and greetings and the steady movement of another Roman morning unfolding around you, something else becomes gently clear. Even now, without noticing, you are still walking through Rome.